All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining today's workshop. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. Please make sure to stay on mute throughout the duration of the workshop. If you have a question, enter it into the chat function within WebEx and we'll make sure it gets answered. We'll start off with a brief intro about Red 8 and our solutions, and then pass it over to Red Hat for the workshop. As a thank you, all of the customer attendees will be receiving a $25 DoorDash gift card. We do have a quick survey that we ask that you fill out at the end once the workshop concludes. So with all of that out of the way, I will pass it over to John Matthew, Director of Cloud and Automation here at Red 8.
Thank you, Yvette. Good morning, everybody. My name is John Matthew, Director of Cloud Automation here at Red 8. Our team does what I like to say, everything not data center. Part of that, though, is the Red Hat portfolio that we love so much. Today is going to be an amazing workshop that I'll be joining you on for network automation. So as Yvette mentioned, we want to give a quick background on who Red 8 is and what we do. So I'll get my slides right here. There we go. So basically, Red 8's mission is to make you more productive as a customer by delivering, really good consulting and technology solutions. Obviously, today, one of those technologies is Ansible. You'll see making your Cisco network environments much more successful. And what I mean by that is using, codifying what you're trying to change in your environment. My background, I've a lot of history in IT. I've been on the VAR space for about 3.5 years, but I've spent my career, working with network teams and seeing how they can sometimes struggle to keep that config in order. So the Red Hat team today will show you a really good option for that. So Red 8 itself is part of the Insight Investments family. We've grown substantially in the last 5-10 years. Like I said, I've been here about 3.5 years. We have several companies. The main one today, obviously, is Red 8. But we have other companies, Insight Financial Services, which has quite a few assets in lease. So it's a leasing company we offer our customers. Since we're not a bank, we have a lot of flexibility there to come up with unique and workable solutions for our customers. Second Gear is a company I've always personally wanted to start. Basically, they take old systems and refurbish them and send them out. I've always found it tragic when I go into my data centers and I'd have a 3-year-old server that needs to be retired because it's out of warranty. So that's a really unique product there, as well as we did obviously some really well during the pandemic, unfortunately, because a lot of people want remote. So schools and things need lots of laptops. I say unfortunate because I would have rather had everybody in the schools. We also have a couple other ones that we've acquired of lately. But we got Harbor and a few others that are sort of sister companies of us. And the beauty of Red 8 is we are scattered all over the nation. And I think this is actually out of date. We've got a few more open these days. But, given the remote work that everybody's doing now, this isn't, having an office isn't as critical. But we are able to service anywhere in the country and some global customers there. So a little bit of background on Red 8, right? We've got established in 1987, roughly 16 locations. We've got lots of assets. Actually, that number is updated. It's 1.2 billion in lease under management. We've got a really nice tech center, which I'm going to have to slide on in just a second. And we have a ton of solution partners, obviously Red Hat being one of them. So been really growing well in the last several years. So again, I think you're on track with the right company and the right technologies. So in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we have this amazing facility. I was lucky enough to go up there and help out about a month ago. With that is our Second Gear facility that takes a variety of systems, either rebuilds them, refurbishes them, upgrades them, what have you. Of late, we've come up with a new service called DLM, Desktop Lifecycle Management. We've taken the complete headache out of ordering new PCs for your company. And that's not just the order, that is the imaging and shipping and returning of those. So you give us a list of names, addresses, and models, and poof, out we send. And that all happens in this facility in a very efficient manner. It's pretty amazing to see how large this is and the fact that they're able to, keep this going day in, day out. Really amazing. From a Red 8 perspective, we have broken out into practices of late. We, 5, 6 years ago, we were just a data center company. We did a lot of NetApp, a lot of, anything in the data center that was rack and stack. We have since moved into many areas of services. I talked about DLM, what we call workforce enablement. We also, my group attacks, say, the Active Directory space, a legacy technology that a lot of people just ignore, but is still there to be dealt with. So we come in, we can do upgrades and stuff like that. Our DevOps cloud practice, which I also run, does a lot in the area that sort of blends in with some of the Ansible stuff. We utilize Ansible to do maybe a CI/CD workflow for your infrastructure, pretty unique there. We obviously do all the clouds and automation space. We have a cybersecurity, which is doing really well. I guess another unfortunate reason, but our cybersecurity practice doing extremely well. We have a director of that as well, named Garrett Scott. He does that. And we also have an AI analytics group, which can help you. We have quite a few interesting projects we've done around that to help companies use AI and ML to uncover, new customers and or problems in their environment. So, and then this is just another stack of how we can offer our services to get you to be more productive, again, meeting that mission statement to bring you to market quicker, as well as use the technology to your advantage. I believe that's it. That's all I have to say, Yvette, and I will leave it up to the Red Hat geniuses to continue the workshop. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. Now we will pass it along to Chris Heineman, Solutions Architect at Red Hat, to lead us through the workshop.
All right. Thanks, Yvette. Thanks, John. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good.
All right. Can everyone see the screen that I've got that says Ansible Automation Platform, Network Automation Workshop?
Yep.
All that? Okay, so you got just the one screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, yeah, thank you again, and everyone, welcome to the Ansible Network Automation Workshop, Cisco Ansible focus today. My name's Chris Heineman, and I'm the DJ that you have. I'm part of the Channel Solutions Architect here at Red Hat group and part of the North America Commercial Sales Organization. I'm based out of Charleston, South Carolina. My role is in partner enablement, and Red 8 has been gracious enough to invite me and some of my other colleagues here today to discuss Ansible automation with all of you. From the Red Hat side, on the call with us, we've got David Marks and Dan Shays. John Welby will also be joining us, all in the solution architect capacity. David and Dan will be helping present, helping us with the labs, rather. John will be presenting the ACI demo, and we'll be able to, field some questions as you have them. Before we get started, let's talk housekeeping real quick. General items here. So we've got about 3 hours together. I want to keep the session, pretty informal and loose, right? If you have a question, go ahead, as you've mentioned, put it in the chat. If it's pertinent, during an exercise or something, go ahead and unmute yourself. If you want to, share what you have question-wise, that's okay. Definitely do speak up, though. If you see something that piques your interest, maybe there's something that you want to know a little bit more about, I'd be happy to address that. If we hear crickets and nobody says anything, we'll assume people are asleep. Then we're probably just going to start talking about the weekend or something. That'll make us kind of sad because we want everyone to be engaged and enjoy, what we have prepared today. We'll try to take a couple 5-minute breaks throughout this, though. I think the best time to get away is during the exercises, but there are a lot of exercises, for the workshop that we're going to be going through. So it's going to be, a tight schedule, but it will be fun. There's no test, there's no quiz or exam for this workshop. The goal is really just to enable, all of you to understand, what's possible with Ansible, specifically in the Cisco space. Please keep in mind that these use cases do also extend out to, other networking technologies that you may use as well. So you'll see, other vendor routers in the lab environment too, but the goal there is just to showcase that Ansible works the same, no matter what you're automating. So again, the main takeaway today is, where to find more resources, feel confident, to run and build an Ansible playbook. and, be able to speak about Ansible in common conversation. So again, introduction to Ansible course focused in network automation at Cisco. Typically, this is provided face-to-face. I think we're getting better at delivering these online. If you have any feedback, please let us know. Hopefully 2022 treats us a little bit better and we can, get together in person to have these. We're going to run things a little bit differently than we normally do. This workshop was provisioned as a network automation workshop. It's deployed in an environment that, again, contains other routers, networking technology. So we have Cisco, Arista, Juniper routers. But, today, again, we're going to focus and narrow that into, Cisco and Ansible. So in order to, support some of the lab exercises that we have and some other things, I've updated some of the slideware to include vendor-specific topics for Cisco networking. We'll be running a live demo of Cisco ACI and showcasing how Ansible integrates there. And then we'll touch on some changes that have been introduced in the Ansible Automation Platform 2, which GA'd during Ansible Fest last month. And what am I missing? Outside of those changes, we'll look at Jinja templating. That'll allow us to enable dynamic expressions, access to variables inside of what we call Ansible playbooks. And then we'll get into some of the exercises. And so the way that that'll work is we'll, talk some upfront theory, which will take us about 20 minutes. And then we'll get into the labs and, give you folks some time to hammer at the keyboard. Thanks for joining us again. We're really glad, to have you and happy to, showcase some of this stuff and we'll get started. Does anyone have any questions before we go? Go ahead and, put a question in the chat if you have one. I've got one for you though. Let's try to gauge some knowledge on Ansible up front, just so we kind of understand who we have on the call. Can you type in 1 if you're currently using Ansible, or 2 if you're not? Just want to kind of see, where some of the folks are at on here. All right, so I like that 1.5. Nice. Okay, that's fair. Couple 2s, 1-ish. Okay. All right.
Hey, Chris, this is Craig. Let me tee up a question of why is Ansible and Cisco better together?
So, is that a question to me or a question to
Never.
Some of the folks that are on here?
Whomever makes sense to address that, kind of kick off with that.
Yeah. Well, so Craig, we're going to get into some of the Cisco stuff when I think John is still joining, so we'll get into that a little bit later. But ultimately, the Cisco and Red Hat have a really long-standing relationship. We've been working together for a long time. Ansible is a fantastic, technology that can automate, pretty much anything Cisco. So the integrations make sense, and it makes sense, especially in the data center where I think a lot of people are, using Cisco technologies. It's very popular. And so we just want to showcase, that technology and those integrations. Okay. Craig is, by the way, a business development executive here at Red Hat. So you might pop in and out with some questions, and we'll engage some conversation there. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. So automation comes out of the frustration of having to repeat the same task over and over again. In IT, regardless of your role or responsibility, I'm sure that you can identify with something that you've had to do multiple times. And so the effort comes at a cost, time, money, sanity in a lot of cases. And so the use case for automation is pretty straightforward. You'd rather have a machine doing the same thing over and over again, instead of spending your brain cycles on it, and give yourself an opportunity to do more. So automation, again, happens when one person meets a problem that they never want to solve again. And so they can configure a machine to do that for them. The problem is that we're seeing a lot of this automation happen in silos. So your DevOps folks might be using Puppet or Jenkins, the security and network folks, some proprietary tool from their vendors. Some are doing PowerShell, simple bash scripting. It's all a bit of kind of like a hodgepodge, right? And so this is organic automation. It's automation that's grown out of necessity, but it's not something that you could consider centrally rooted. It's not collaborative, and it's certainly not something that's shareable. And so with all of these automation strategies that exist, there's a realization of a need to utilize one common platform to accelerate the efforts that more quickly respond to demands from key stakeholders, users, customers, and everyone. And so the strategy around that is to extend the use case, help more teams to automate, more things, make the barrier for automation entry a whole lot lower and easier to get started, in that process. And so this is what Ansible Automation platform does. It's all about the idea that, within each of these teams that you see here, there's an Ansible conversation and an automation conversation to be had. So why Ansible, for that? Ansible addresses the needs of an organization seeking to unify these automation efforts into a single strategy, reduce the cost and complexities of the engineering and operations team. It makes it easier to wrap your head around automation as a whole because everything is together holistically. Red Hat's take and the message with Ansible is to utilize one common platform to accelerate automation efforts. Something that can meet customers where they are in their automation journeys, and we'll talk about automation journeys in a few short slides, but also have the flexibility to transcend across physical or virtual environments as well as the cloud. So let me get started with the hallmarks here. Simple, powerful, agentless. As far as simplicity goes, there's no special coding skills required to read or write Ansible's YAML language into playbooks. And so YAML looks the same no matter what you're trying to automate. And because of this, there is less required training to bring teams up to speed and working efficiently. So even those with fewer technical skills can participate in this automation. And this allows for implementation to be more widespread, cover more domains, making the automation that much more effective. It's also very powerful because it not only covers configuration management, cloud resources, but it also covers IT infrastructure as a whole. So we're talking security, application deployment, of course, networking, and a whole lot more. You don't need to buy different automation products for each of the IT domains that we were kind of talking about back here. So that's, one of the things that makes it very powerful. Let's see what else. Ansible is also agentless, and it's something that just integrates into everything with what's already there. And so this provides for the ability to seamlessly fill gaps and tie together, ongoing efforts without forcing, part of the lines of business or other teams that you may have to start over with their automation efforts. And this is supported and enabled by, agentless architecture, and allows you to, again, connect to what is already native to the tools that you're using in your data center already. So no requirements to load any agents on any of the target devices that you have. It just works right out of the box. We'll talk more about that and see that as we, get into the labs. A lot of people, when they first hear Ansible, maybe some of the folks on here who, entered one, have heard of Ansible as something that's config management. But it's really, a whole lot more than that. It's a total Swiss Army knife. Any one of these, gray boxes at the top here is a conversation that can include Ansible. So in the security and compliance space, something that John had mentioned at the start of this call, there are a ton of use cases that we have around that. I've worked with some of the folks on my team to automate OpenSCAP scanning for a lab that we built. We were able to scan, a number of hosts loaded into a Red Hat satellite instance and insights for PCI compliance, and turn around and push button remediate those issues that were found, or those found to be non-compliant. But as far as other aspects of security and compliance, you can create snort rules, maybe switch port rules for ACLs, deploy configs for network devices. Just a couple of ideas there. Cloud automation. Again, same team got tired of going into AWS to create EC2 instances for RHEL 8 boxes that we were doing some testing with. So we created some playbooks to go ahead and do that for us. We pulled the AMI type that we needed. We set the region, everything that we needed to have this fresh image running. And so the same can be done for, networking devices that you may have in the cloud. I didn't really mention applications to networking because we're going to be spending a lot of time on that. So, hang tight there. But I really like this slide because it gives you an idea for general usage for Ansible across the enterprise. And it showcases that although it's simple by design, it's something that's very powerful. So any questions about this? And then we'll move on to kind of what what this looks like as far as the Ansible automation platform. Okay, not seeing anything in there, so that's okay. This is the Ansible ecosystem. But before we dig in on this slide, I need to tell you that there are some, you're taking this workshop at a very interesting time. There are some changes. We recently GA'd Ansible Automation 2.0 a few months ago. Well, I think it was, debuted at Ansible Fest, but it has been, out since maybe the late summer or midsummer. So what does that mean for us? First, we don't necessarily refer to Ansible Engine anymore. For those of you that have typed 1.5 and 2, these are containerized execution environments. They take over as the method to conduct automation. Ansible Tower becomes Ansible Controller, and as Ansible kind of evolves, we're going to continue to decouple certain functionality and introduce, naming changes that better reflect its enhancements and overall position within the Ansible Automation Platform Suite. Now, that said, Ansible 1.0 isn't end of life until November of 2022. That, those dates are subject to change, but, that's kind of where it's at now. But the demos and exercises that you're going to be doing today as part of the workshop are all based on Ansible 1.0. And so that's just wanted to give you a heads up of that. We'll talk more about execution environments when we get to the labs. Engine is where Ansible started. It's command line driven. It's where you can draft and run your playbooks. And those are formatted in a YAML language and written to perfectly describe your IT application infrastructure. So from the bottom up, we move to Tower. That's where we scale our automation. It provides a graphical user interface, RBAC to a role-based access control to enforce separation of duties, job scheduling, supports REST APIs. So you can easily embed, Tower into existing functionality into existing tools and processes. Ansible software as a service. This is a little bit out of scope for today's conversation, but it's worth, sharing that we have, software as a service-based tools in Ansible that make day-to-day life more efficient for automation users. So those include Ansible content collections, the automation hub, and automation analytics. And we can talk about those if anyone has any specific questions, but don't want to, derail, too much as far as the networking, part of this goes. So take a look at this, this slide here, see if there's any, technologies that you're familiar with, especially in the networking space. Hopefully you can identify some of the ones, too, since again, this is a networking automation workshop. Admittedly, this slide is constantly changing, but I think it's a testament to the versatility of Ansible. The partner ecosystem for Ansible is something that's just frankly massive. And the takeaway here is that Ansible automates, again, technologies that you're already using. So we have a tremendous body of partners who are, listed here. They're continuously building around the YAML language, around the Ansible automation platform, working to contribute certified content. And then there's an even greater community, of contributing more integrations every day. So we're constantly adding and updating to this list. It's kind of a moving target, but just wanted to give you an idea there.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Yeah, this is John Welby. I joined a few minutes ago. Just want to let you know I was here, as well as expound upon what you're saying about our partners.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah, thanks, John.
Yeah, let me introduce myself quickly to the folks on the call. So I'm a fellow SA solutions architect at Red Hat. I spent about 13 years at Cisco, CCIE, started in TAC, worked in advanced services, and now I'm over here at Red Hat. And Cisco, and I support the Cisco Alliance, meaning I'm working with the CTO at Cisco that supports IBM and Red Hat on developing joint go-to-market solutions, both technical and sales plays, et cetera. And Cisco is an awesome partner. For example, all the modules for ACI and multi-site orchestrator, MSO, are written by Cisco, fully supported by Cisco, as well as many other technologies. So when they develop them, they support them, and then they have much more elaborate playbooks and modules that they're doing in-house for their own intellectual property, like advanced services. For example, Cisco TAC will use Ansible as well as Terraform to stand up recreates. If you got a P1 that they can't resolve live, they may have to do what's called a recreate. So they have to spin up the customer's environment, a smaller scale, of course, but spin it up, test the firmware, test the software, different line cards, what have you. And they can spin this up now using Terraform and Ansible in a matter of 20 minutes versus back in my day, you have to physically put all the hardware together, cable it, etc. So it's a huge time saver. All right, I won't steal too much time. I'll give it back to you, Chris. And
No,
if
thanks,
anybody
John.
has specific Cisco questions, please let me know.
Yeah, and we are going to hit the network automation content now, and kind of move into Cisco, and then we're going to get our hands around some labs. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. Kind of just to John's point, when we looked at building integration for networks in Ansible, we really wanted to focus on the context of solving real problems for network engineers, network operations folks. And to that end, we've developed a set of some use cases that drive all of the integrations. And this centers around things like config automation. It's foundational. It's how we start to build automation in our networks. Another is test-driven deployment, because network devices are ephemeral state machines, and we need to be able to validate that post configurations create the desired operating state that we want them to be in. And this is part of developing infrastructure as code. And then finally, around compliance, the idea being that to continually monitor your network infrastructure, both from a config management standpoint, as well as from, again, an ephemeral state standpoint, to ensure everything's operating, as we expect it to. So in many regards.
Let me add something to that, Chris,
Yeah,
if I may.
sure. Yeah.
When I was advanced services at Cisco, I was working at the State Department, and we had sold them on moving from DMVPN to IWAN. And this was, I think, in 2014. And then we did a proof of concept for them, and they bought off. But then, we announced the acquisition of Viptela, so it kind of canceled the IWAN. But my point was, we had to clean up their routing, their wide area network routing, as well as their tunnel configs, and it was a mess. It took us several months to do that. And if we would have had something like Ansible to do config backups nightly, weekly, whatever period, then you can actually do diffs, configuration diffs against that. And if a change was made, you can even have a workflow that would open a ServiceNow ticket or whatever your ticketing system is. Say, go to the NOC manager or your architecture manager. Was this approved? No. Okay, let's roll back. And my point is, if we would have had that, it would have saved us a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of frustration. And it's also a good way to get introduced, to get your feet wet, so to speak, with automation, network automation. It's very simple. It's not real glamorous, but it can be a huge time saver and a huge benefit to the company. As well as, like Chris was saying, compliance. You've got documentation at the ready. You've got a central source of truth where your configs are. You get audited. You can go straight to that, print it off, hand it to them, and boom, you're should be in compliance. Okay, Chris, back to you.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, appreciate the info there. It's good to have some of the anecdotes, especially because John is very heavily in the Cisco Ansible realm, and we're going to be hearing from him a little bit more as we kind of move on. But in regards to how we still manage and operate our networks today, it's very much like the is done in the 80s. So I'm referencing the very node by node CLI driven style of management. And so with the advent of automation platforms, and very specifically in what we're doing with Ansible, we're looking at ways to transform the operational environment for the NetOps folks and the network engineering folks. We want to do that using infrastructure as code that facilitates the sharing and reuse of automation in networking environments. So, to the point on the screen, 68% of 77 respondents indicated that they still use command line interface on individual devices as the primary method of making network changes. Whoever can do the math, 68% of 77, and type it in the chat first gets a shout out, because that's some fun stuff. Network operations, though, really hasn't changed that much in the last few decades. The engineers that design and manage networks, again, are doing this manually. So that means logging into a switch by hand, making changes to the running config, and then just logging out, and then having to do that time and time again. Many of the people that gravitated to NetOps as like a position didn't want to be programmers. They weren't interested in implementing and maintaining network policies that were defined by methods of procedures. And so with the rise of Linux systems on the server side, the traditional, proprietary, get my words together, networking methodologies, this continued to persist despite the rise of DevOps and open source. So regardless, it was only a matter of time until server side and DevOps practices would invade the networking world, and then have cloud administrators forced to support both the compute and network resources. So that's kind of why networking hasn't really changed too much. But networking is at the point where managing from the command line is going to become unsustainable. It's going to be untenable, and we're working towards that. As we grow with all of the new things we're managing, it's undergoing some very big transformations, networking in general. And so, like Cisco in its 2020 networking global network trends report, they had kind of mentioned some things like the evolving technology landscape is impacting network architectures and operations. So one of the predictions that came out of that was more than 700 million edge hosted containers by 2021, more than 14.6 billion IoT devices by 2022. So you're probably well aware of the proliferating systems and implementations on the hybrid cloud. But there's a lot of changes here. This is going to require more effort for management. This is where automation comes in, just trying to get the minds going about how we're going to solve some of these problems with automation, why automation is necessary, and then we'll see why Ansible is the tool to do that. So it is definitely not as simple anymore as it used to be. But for networks, we talked about why Ansible, why it was important, simple, powerful, agentless. It's simple for the operator and the developer. I know it says, for operators, not developers, but what we mean by that is you don't have to be a developer to make proper, efficient use of network automation. It's just the idea to get productive quickly, accessibility, provided to those folks to create, share, and reuse automation. Powerful in the way that, it's adaptable. For example, there's an iOS plugin for Ansible. And so you can run iOS commands in Ansible to manage Cisco iOS devices. You don't have to have a module. We'll talk about those as we move on. But, it's a crawl, walk, run approach to automation. And again, agentless, it's ideal for networking gear because there's not, agents to exploit, and two, because there's a lot of network gear out there. And this includes, legacy networking devices that simply don't have the memory or compute to handle an agent. And so, a lot of folks have trouble automating some of those things.
And also, Chris, to add to the agentless aspect, InfoSec personnel love that because we're not putting additional code or any code on devices that are managed. And they, security-minded folks do not like that because that can introduce additional vulnerabilities, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as far as the ecosystem go, and John kind of alluded to this, as well as I think I mentioned this, a little bit as far as like certified content. We have a network ecosystem around, switches, routers, enterprise firewalls, like you name it, right? With a lot of different vendors who contribute to automation for that. And so I just wanted to, have this up here to kind of give you a visual for that, and let you know that there's definitely a lot of folks, working in this space and excited about Ansible and creating content for Ansible. So on to Cisco. I kind of touched on this in the beginning. Craig had asked the question why, Cisco, and John can help me out here. Cisco and Red Hat again have been working together for, I think it's over 10 years now. The commitments between Red Hat and Cisco, they're incredibly strong. This goes all the way back to RHEL. So we're talking enterprise Linux in the data center on UCS, HyperFlex. More than that, the amount of work that goes into building Cisco validated designs is pretty substantial. And so Cisco makes a huge effort in maintaining their .releases, as our products mature, whether that be around RHEL, Ansible, what have you.
And Chris?
Yeah.
So, and I work with, like I said, the Cisco CTO and the different business units at Cisco. So we're very tightly integrated within different business units at Red Hat with, like the data center BU or the ACI BU, whatever they're called these days.
Yeah.
Same thing with, HyperFlex, basically every product they have. We're working on containerizing, like the ASA. Actually, that may be out now. So yeah, there's a very tight integration between Cisco and Red Hat. And if you look, if you're familiar with DevNet, developer.cisco.com, there is a ton of stuff out there as far as learning labs, learning, sessions, videos, using Ansible to automate anything from Nexus to ACI to Viptela, anything you see on the screen as well. So it's that's a great tool. If you're not familiar with DevNet, spend some time and pick and poke around. Great resource.
Yeah, it absolutely is. There's a lot of good info out there. And talking more about Cisco and solutions that are with Ansible, Cisco does a lot of stuff, right? They operate in many different domains. Managing across those domains can sometimes be challenging because Cisco, like a lot of other vendors, have different management tools depending on the product area that you kind of find yourself in. Well, this is where Ansible comes in. It helps to abstract away the complexity of the challenge and help automate across the entire Cisco landscape. So we're able to bridge the gap for Cisco offerings and become that kind of connective tissue for the networking units that we work with. So, in a few minutes, John's going to help us out, show us a Cisco ACI demonstration. But, before we do that, John, what do you think? Anything else about, some of the solutions that are kind of going on? Does anyone have, any questions in the crowd, about specific, solutions that they're working with in the Cisco world?
Yeah, while we're waiting for questions, and let me know if the background noise is too much. I can close my window.
Nope, sounds okay.
Okay. So, I developed this slide, and the sales folks I work with really like it because it shows really how Ansible fits in with Cisco and vice versa. So Ansible can be the middleman. It could be the top level orchestrator. It's very flexible. It doesn't have to be the top level, or it doesn't have to be the middleman, but you can set up workflows. For example, I have a playbook that can pull inventory dynamically from DNA Center and then, run playbooks against that. I've got, and one that I'll demo here shortly is running against the APIC, programming the controller to set up VRF tenants and VRFs in the tenants and applying fabric policy to the fabric. So it can do, however you want to do it, in your customer's case or your case, Ansible can fit.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, John. Let's kind of look at this real quick. So these are, one of the ways to help bridge, the gap that I was talking about between, all of these technologies here in Ansible is with the certified modules and plugins, specific to Cisco. John hinted on this earlier. We have more than 500 modules and plugins in the Cisco space. And so this content is supported and certified from both Red Hat and Cisco. It's one of the ways that we're able to get folks, up and moving quickly with Ansible. So you're not actually having to write a lot of the Cisco automation yourself and start from complete scratch. You're simply appending arguments to tell, modules how to behave in your environment. And in the event, a module doesn't exist for the use case, Ansible's fully browsable API can be used to tie automation into those products. I have an example of, the Cisco iOS modules that exist. This is on docs.ansible.com, but also have, the certified collections that are, with a subscription, you would get access to that are, again, supported by both Red Hat and Cisco. And so like if we go to, iOS, here we're going to be able to look at some of the modules that exist, for iOS. Maybe we want to do ACLs, ACL interfaces. And so the way that the module works is you kind of like get a synopsis for what it does. These are parameters, switches, if you will, that you'll, give it. And then the playbook actually has the module in it referenced, and that's when you kind of give it some arguments and how you want to interact with the module to actually automate the things that you're going to automate. So that's kind of like, this is like a quick sneak peek to a playbook. I don't mean to, scare you off with this real quick, because this one, is a little bit in depth, but we'll talk more about all that stuff shortly. So yeah, again, modules, plugins, Cisco has them for, everything that you see here. So again, a lot of integrations. Let's talk about the network automation journey. But before I do that, I just want to get like a check. How's everyone doing? We're bumping up to the Cisco ACI demo. John probably take about 20 minutes for that. Then we're going to dive into the labs. So I'm looking to have, almost 2 hours to do the labs, because they are, kind of long. I will expect that we'll have, some homework to do. And, you can take some of those labs if we don't quite finish up. But that's, of course, if you're willing to take that on. So is everyone doing okay? All right. Ted's 5 out of 5. Love it. Thanks, Ted. All right. So a couple things. I always tell people when starting out with Ansible, don't try to boil the ocean and automate everything right away. Introduce automation into your environment slowly. It requires a bit of a culture change. You're introducing new people to new processes. In some cases, you need to get your workflows down. You need to test before you go anywhere. If you try and automate everything all at once, it's going to be like filling up a swimming pool with buckets. My analogy game isn't so good, but that's what I have. The second thing I always tell people is, pick 3 things that if you can automate just 3 things that would make your life 100 times easier, what would that be? Because that's what you focus on at first, just the 3. People start looking at modules, they start looking at Ansible, and they're like, I can do, all this stuff. Yes, you can, but we're not institutionalized yet, especially if you're, starting, and the one that we kind of talked about earlier. Once you get 1 or 2 of those wins, locked down, that radiates out, it builds confidence, and then, your skills get better, and then the ball starts to move forward. So you move from this opportunistic through systematic phase, and then into the institutionalized phase. And so there's different things that we do, they're backup and restore, dynamic documentation, things that don't require, I call it quote unquote offensive automation, where you're like changing things, but backups and restore dynamic documentation, doing facts like these. It's not like you're actually making changes to a production environment. You're just pulling down some data that you can format, and often simplify some tasks.
One opportunity we have these days with COVID and the chip shortage, and I've been talking to Wes Kennard, who's the Cisco CTO I work with, is optimizing customers' networks as they sit now. And what I mean by that is a lot of the new hardware is not shipping because Cisco's lacking the silicon to finish the builds. So one thing we can do is go into customers and say, hey, we'll optimize, by software updates, maybe the next generation line card if we have them in stock or can get them. So it's not just like backup and restores, which are important. That can be used for regulatory compliance as well. But an optimization service, fine tune your network to get you through another year, 18 months, till we start getting the chips in again, and you can update your hardware. And the backup and configs, having those can help you plan when you need to do a hardware or software refresh. You'll know where you're at, what you have specifically, in your network, and then you can migrate accordingly.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to that point, these are a lot of things that we see network engineers have quick victories with. I'm not going to go into, all of these, but if, we want to talk about those, as a one-off, be happy to do that. But, you start small and again, crawl, walk, run. So, we can hit on network compliance, maybe as you become more systematic, more institutionalized, in the automation journey, you start to look at things like network compliance and operational state validation and automated NetOps. And so when we talk about network compliance, you're looking at using Ansible to enforce configuration policies. So you might choose to schedule automation jobs to make sure that your Cisco devices, switches, routers, what have you, look at that against a known good config, in your source of truth. If your source of truth has 3 VLANs in your switch and a 4th one shows up outside of that change process, you can set up automation, to remove that, log that configuration, send an alert, send a text. You can't, send a text through Ansible, but you can configure devices to send texts out. Again, connective tissue to a lot of different technologies.
There's also a play where we can connect to Cisco's P-Cert system and automate, go out and automate the checks, and then look at our configs that we already have backed up and stored in our central source of truth and say, we're vulnerable to several, CVEs, and then we can remediate dynamically, or, get approval first and then remediate. So that's a pretty slick way to keep up to date and keep the network as secure as possible.
Yep, absolutely. So here's kind of an example for what automated, NetOps might look like. This is it could also be referred to as infrastructure as code. And it encompasses aspects of continuous integration, continuous delivery. So yeah, I mean, don't be fooled by the word code. Many times, we even advertise this as infrastructure as YAML, because you eventually are only editing YAML files in your source control management SCM system, what have you. So this particular drawing is showing a NetOps method. As we learned, a network engineer might modify a data-centric data model provided by network automation modules. And so there's a pull request done to a Git repository in this example, but it doesn't have to be Git. And it can be other SCM sources if you want to push the code, and this keeps track of changes. It allows numerous teams to keep track of what's really going on. There's the webhook that automatically talks to programmatic APIs for Ansible, kicks off an automation workflow. And this is just an example of how it might work.
And let's stress, Chris, the importance of this. Having a repository such as GitHub, GitLabs, whatever whatever flavor you may use, is that's a central source of truth. And that's
Mhm.
powerful. It's not like I've got it on my laptop, Chris has it on his laptop, or we have it on another server, and the other guys have it somewhere else. This is centralized. There's version control. If a developer makes a change, if you have a webhook into Ansible, it can start up like Chris said, kick off a job and then run an update automatically. No user intervention. If you don't want, you can obviously have it if you want as well. So this is key to this infrastructure as code. It's having it centralized. It's version controlled. It does not change, or if it does, you know what the changes were. You can roll back, which is we don't have that easily otherwise if it's scattered over people's laptops, servers, etc.
Yep.
Okay, guys.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and with this, kind of CI/CD image, that we have here, this tying everything together, it can run on development infrastructure, simulated infrastructure.
And speaking of simulated infrastructure, I don't know how many of the folks on the call are familiar with CML, Cisco Modeling Labs, but I've got that running in AWS as well as Ansible.
What's
And what you can
configured?
do there
Yeah.
is you can, create networks, virtual networks through CML, and then you can export it. And the default format is, guess what? It's YAML. Boom. You basically have a playbook. So you could pock up, create a network in CML, export it through CML utils, and boom, you can, port it to production, error free, and big time time savings.
There you go. There you go. And John, this flies perfectly into the demo here. Are you able to cover some of these topics and show us what you're doing with Ansible and Cisco ACI, the some of the solutions that you've got?
So what's ACI? I'm
Very
joking.
funny.
I'm just a riot. Okay, so ACI, I've installed several fabrics now. And if you're not familiar with it, it's Cisco's next generation software defined network for the data center. And what that means is instead of having discrete, you have to configure this switch, that switch, that switch, that router, you're configuring or pushing policy via the controller, by the controller out to the nodes, out to the fabric. And that ties in very nicely to Ansible, because with Ansible, you're just talking to the controller, then the controller pushes it out to all the Nexus 9Ks, et cetera, that are the leafs and spines. And what Cisco is doing with this is it's called intent-based networking. So you can push policy, you can do it dynamically. If you're running titration, there are IPSs, IDSs, or even Palos, other vendors. You can detect anomalies. If there's a bad actor, you can detect that. You can automatically sandbox them, do microsegmentation, and that can all be dynamic. So like every node on the network or every device is a sensor, via Kafka bus sending information back to titration, and then you can run kickoff playbooks accordingly. So that's the point of ACI, and then automating it. The installation's automated, by Cisco, but day one, day two operations, even though the GUI is pretty nice, there is so much to configure. And I know ACI fairly well. I'm not a Cisco developer, so if you're not trying to find out where to configure something, and then it's got 100 different dependencies you need to configure as well, and protocols, that's where Ansible comes in, because it can be pretty time consuming to try to figure out where in the GUI to find. You configure a VRF or bridge domain, and then there's literally hundreds of options to configure each of those subsystems. So that's where Ansible can come in. So let me take over. Share my
Yeah,
screen.
please do. Thanks, John.
So let's see, screen one. I hope
And once we roll through the demo, maybe some folks will have some questions, and if not, we can jump straight into the labs and get some workbenches assigned and have y'all Pack at the keyboard.
Okay, so I've got Ansible configured in AWS, and if anybody wants to access it, I can actually give access as well, so you can play with it. And you can do the same thing. You can set this up rather quickly. And I'm running again. So I've got this running in AWS, and I'm running against the DevNet sandbox, the ACI always on sandbox. And again, that's another great reason for you to go get familiar with the DevNet website, because they have sandboxes. Some are you have to register, and then it'll spin up, whatever you're doing. But they also have some always on sandboxes, one of which is ACI, which is nice if you don't, have your own ACI fabric, which most of us don't. Even, if you work at Cisco, you likely don't have your own to play with unless it's the virtual. So what I'm doing here,
John, real quick, just if you could, just so everyone here knows, this is the Ansible Automation platform. This is Tower, right? And so I know we haven't really gotten to some of these concepts yet, but this is kind of showing some automation that's already been run. That's why you see the green arrows up and down. So John, if you could just maybe hit on kind of where some of this stuff is.
Okay, so in general, there's three things you need when you're going to run a playbook. You'll need an inventory, so that's what you're running against. So in my case, it's actually the DevNet sandbox. So if you look at my inventory, the hosts, so that's actually the URL you would go to. So sandbox apic dc datacenter.cisco.com. Simple as that. So you've got an inventory, then you create projects, and then the templates, which basically runs whatever projects you've created. And it can be, one module or one playbook, or you can have a workflow that kicks off, do something in the ACI fabric, and then kick off a ServiceNow ticket to say, do we want to create, an SQL server, get authorization? Okay. Create an SQL server in the fabric, et cetera. Then you have to set up the communications between the endpoints and the server. So there's a whole lot you can do here. And so this project, as you can see, I'm running against Git. So you can tell it Git, it can be manual, it could be Red Hat Insights, et cetera. And then all you do is you give it the URL for your repository. And in my case, that's my GitHub URL for the ACI demo. And then you can say clean, delete on update, update revision on launch, which means it basically cleans out the memory, deletes it, and also goes back to Git to your repository in case you're doing the CI/CD. If your developers are making updates, you'll get the latest and greatest. Essentially, you don't have to do that. It does kick off another job, and that job is to go out to Git, pull the repository, the playbook, etc., and then run it. So I just do that to show what's possible. And then you give it permissions. So it's all relatively simple. You can set up notifications, but the last thing you do is go into templates and create a template that effectively does the heavy lifting. So once you have the connection to your Git repository, GitLabs, or whatever your repository is, you then tell it, I've got several options, and I'm running the sample.yaml, but this shows now that it's connected to my repository, I've got all these options. So in this case, we'll stick with this. And then you can set the verbosity. If this is a new playbook, you don't know if it's working, or you ran it, it doesn't work. You can say debug, more verbose, etc. And then this is where if you want to enable webhooks of, like, for example, Chris made a change that I didn't know about, this would automatically run a job based on the changes he made, or whoever. Then let's go ahead and go back to the dashboard, and we'll go ahead and run it. So you can click on this little rocket ship to start the job. And you can see I've got the Cisco, the ACI automation template, Intersight. So I've got a HyperFlex cluster that's being managed by Intersight that goes out, just basically pulls inventory and displays it. And then I've got a couple other ones that I can show in the future. So let's go ahead and run this. And hopefully everything's good with the always on sandbox. Sometimes it does get bogged down and it can fail, but most of the time it runs pretty well. Yep, good. With live demos, you never know. And this is showing exactly what it's doing. So this is the debug. Okay, so this shows successful. So before I go into there, let's go back to a higher level. And you can see when I kicked off that job initially, when I clicked the rocket, it started job 59, which then, since I said update always, it started job 60 to go out to SCM, to GitHub in my case, to pull the new repo, or to pull the repo. So let's go back into this guy. And you can see what it did. So going in here, it's pulling sample.yaml. That's the playbook. Oh, look at that. A supremely awesome Ansible automation demo of Cisco ACI. Wow, that's slick. So what it does, like I mentioned before, it goes to the DevNet sandbox. It creates a couple of tenants in the fabric, some VRFs in those tenants, and then pushes LLDP fabric policy. So, I mean, it's nothing earth-shattering, but it's kind of cool. It's all automated by a push of a button. And this can be elaborate. You can, some Cisco TMEs are doing this, and then they install a Microsoft database, and then they have to configure access, since ACI is zero trust, meaning you have to configure explicitly all communication. So you set up a database, then you have endpoints. So you have to set up contracts and policy to allow them to communicate, set up bridge domains and a whole bunch of stuff. So it's you can get as deep into it as you like. And then you can see change. So it creates this internal tenant. And if I ran it again, it'll say zero changed at the end, because as Chris probably mentioned, Ansible is idempotent. So if it doesn't need to make a change, it doesn't. It'll run through and say zero changed. So the tenant, internal, and you go down, there'll be another external tenant. And it creates the private networks, or the VRFs within each tenant. So again, nothing really earth-shattering. Call it green, just named them different colors. And then at the end, it applies the fabric policy. And this is a task. So each function or subroutine, if you're somewhat familiar with programming, you can consider this kind of a subroutine, or it's a task. And then at the end, it gives you, if you're in debug, gives you some pretty good information about what it did. And then the play recap. OK equals 3, changed equals 3. Again, if I ran it right now again, because everything's been configured, it would say OK 3, changed equals 0. So it's pretty straightforward. And let me also show you. So that's running a playbook. You can do the same thing. You can, copy my repo and run this on your own, set it up in AWS. Initially, I had this set up on my laptop, which worked fine, but then it doesn't scale. Or if, my laptop blows up, then I'm SOL. So I run it in AWS, which is, I can give access to customers and partners as well. Okay, so let's go to.
So John, there's a question in here. So there's some folks who are interested in getting access to this, and what I would like to say to that real quick is, if we could, John, do you think we could just get some emails and then send out access to that, or what do you think the best way?
Yeah, probably just I'll give you my email, or you have it, Chris, and they can email me, and then I will just set up an account in Ansible in AWS and give them the access information. They can have at it.
Okay. All right. Chris Collier had asked if there's an online repo that's shared by the community to download existing scripts that people have developed. So I think what we're talking about there are, any integrations with ACI, which do exist, right, for ACI solutions.
So we have Galaxy, then we have, so that's the open source with the community, not supported by Red Hat or Cisco, or at least not directly. And then there's DevNet. So there's actually the DevNet, was it Code Exchange? And you once you pick and poke around, and I could go through it, but there's they have sample playbooks and modules, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. So I would recommend Galaxy, unless you have a Red Hat subscription, then you can go to access.redhat.com and go to DevNet as well. And quickly, I will show you, this is Cisco Modeling Labs. So you can set this up, and these are routers, switches. And once you have this, and you can actually click on a link, and you can, replay packet captures, specific traffic. You can, give it a bandwidth. You can introduce latency, jitter, delay, packet loss, etc. So it's pretty cool. And you can, once you have this up and running, if you wanted to run the CML utils, you export it, and then you basically have your playbook to run an Ansible playbook to deploy to production. And while I'm here, let me go to so if you go to DevNet, you've got learning tracks, and there's a lot of good stuff, and it's free. Courses, the sandboxes. So you go in for ACI, you go into data center, but there's cloud. So you can do Viptela, collaboration, unified communications. So there's a lot of good stuff here. You got titration and security, their IPSs, IDSs, ASAs, etc. And then, networking, typical route switch stuff. So there is, a lot of information regarding obviously Cisco stuff, but as well as Ansible and Terraform. So Terraform, I know some Red Hatters get a little leery on when I mention Terraform, but it's not really an either or. They can be very complementary. Terraform can do some things that Ansible doesn't, and vice versa. And for example, Cisco IT uses both to stand up, their data centers. Cisco TAC uses both, and Cisco Advanced Services and TMEs also use both. So it can be a very powerful combination using Terraform as well as Ansible. Are there any questions? Would you like to see anything else before we continue?
Let's see if we get any comments in the chat here. So John, is it okay if we put the email in the chat, or should we circle back and
no, that's fine. I'll do that. You can take the screen back, and I will go into chat.
Okay.
And put my email.
Let's do that. All right. Does everyone have my screen again? It says exercise 1. Wow.
Yep.
I can see it.
Okay. All right. Cool. So yeah, thanks, John, for that. Really appreciate it. Hopefully, that fulfilled some interest, especially in the ACI space, and further kind of let everyone know about the integrations that we have with Ansible Automation platform and Cisco. So we're going to get into the labs. So we've kind of reached the first exercise. Just to recap, this is kind of how this will work. So we've got probably about 2 hours roughly. And of course, I think I can stay for another 15-20 minutes afterwards if there are some folks that still want to hack at it and ask questions. But we're going to run through some concepts that are pertinent to the exercises, and then turn all of you loose to get hands on the keyboard. I know you don't have your workspaces assigned yet. We'll get to that in just a short second. But any questions thus far? I mean, John asked for some questions, so I just want to see how everyone's doing. Don't forget to use the chat. We're all kind of monitoring it a little bit. So again, feel free. Like this is why we're all here today. So
And Chris, I put in my email and my cell phone, so feel free
cool.
to reach out.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Okay. So exercise 1, understanding inventory. What's a playbook look like? We'll just kind of, run through this real quick. Just, in the sake of time. So the connection plugins for networks, depending on what you're interacting with, netconf, network CLI, HTTP, API. So, different ways that Ansible can connect to the different devices that you have in your data center. And this kind of shows how Ansible executes code against some of your devices. So the reason it's handled differently between networking devices and Windows or Linux hosts or other devices is simply because of the taxation of resources. And we touched on that briefly, but we have to be under the assumption that the networking device can't support Python, which is the underlying language for a lot of the module code. So in the first example here, and this holds true for today's workshop, the code is going to be executed on the control node first. That's the Ansible components, and then that's pushed out to the networking devices, typically over SSH. It's essentially you can think of it as kind of like an API call, receiving this automation, and that's because the networking devices again don't have the memory to handle that module code. Remote execution is the other one, how we would do with servers or other general infrastructure, and in that case the module code is actually copied to the managed node that's having the automation done. It's executed and then it's removed. So if there are any questions about that, be happy to address that as they come. This section is kind of focused on how Engine's going to work. So we're going to get into the CLI of the devices we're going to use. CLI of Ansible, we're going to issue some commands to see what the Ansible environment looks like. So this is the engine part. This is kind of you saw this earlier. This is kind of going to work its way up between tower and engine. So bonus points real quick. What did we say Ansible engine was going to be called in Ansible 2.0? Does anyone remember? Or tower? Can we remember what we're going to call those in 2.0 when that when we start to use that? That's okay. We don't remember. Give it another second and then I'll cheat and tell you guys. So Ansible controller for tower and execution environments for what's traditionally known as engine. So this is what engine looks like, or your execution environments are going to be a little bit different than this, but the core functionality and logic holds the same. So you have your inventory, as John mentioned, modules, plugins, and then the way it works is you have your playbooks. They're written in YAML. They're going to invoke Ansible modules, things called tasks within those, within the playbooks, and they get executed sequentially in order from top to bottom. The modules, we've talked about that a little bit. These are executable bits of code that are pushed out to your targets. One of the cool things about Ansible is, again, you don't have to understand the underlying properties of the module to get them to work. The Python, a lot of coders use Python, but if you're a casual Ansible user, you can do it by simply appending arguments or switches to the modules themselves. One of the modules you'll be using today is iOS facts. We'll see how that works. It'll collect a base set of device facts from a remote, from a router running iOS. You have your inventory. This is what it kind of looks like. It's listed in an INI format, which is on the left here. Plugins are pieces of code that augment Ansible's core functionality. And it's really something that kind of expands the feature set here. So it ships with a number of handy plugins. You can write your own as well. Some examples of those are like inventory and shell plugins. Another is filter plugin, that's actually displayed here. This allows you to transform whatever was piped into the filter out to something else. So that's kind of how a filter plugin works. Anatomy of an automation job. So if you're wondering, all right, how does this all fit together? What does it look like? So we kind of went through the components, for Ansible, but what does the anatomy look like? So we start off with an Ansible playbook. You have to create a project to do that in Ansible. It's a logical collection of our playbooks. I see a question in here. I will get to that in a second. So from our project that we have, we then go off and we create credentials, and these credentials are utilized by Ansible Tower for authentication to the various external resources that it needs. Maybe it's CyberArk or HashiCorp or some other source of truth where those credentials can be stored. They can also be stored within Ansible securely. So then we create inventories to store collections of hosts, and we can group them in order. You'll see how some of the inventory is grouped in our lab today. And then finally, we have the Ansible Automation platform. In this case, it's Tower. To take all that information, run the job against the inventory hosts with the appropriate credentials in place. You can run automation from Engine, which is going to turn into the execution environments. You can run automation from Tower, which will become Controller in 2.0. Hopefully that's not confusing. Please let me know if that is. I'll try to explain it in a different way. Looks like someone asked, is the module pushed to the target node from Ansible? So in that case, Ansible will pull in the module for Ansible Galaxy, then pushed out to the target node. So you're going to essentially have Ansible set up where you will download these modules, whether it be through Galaxy, which are user-generated content, or downloaded through the Red Hat certified collections. And so once those collections are loaded into your Ansible environment, you can then use those to automate against the devices that you need to automate. So you're going to pull all of this down into your automation platform, and then once it's loaded in, you'll be able to execute the different. I'm just going to pull up like the ACLs again. So you'll be able to execute the different automation that you would want. So like this is your module here, and so with the iOS collections that exist, I can use this module and append these switches, quote unquote, to automate my Cisco device. Hopefully that answers the question. That's kind of how that works. Inventory, talked about that. Don't want to spend too much time. Again, we group it. I want to get you all to the exercises. If I'm rushing through this, please let me know. I'll slow down, or we can kind of go one-on-one. So again, we can group them, and we can use variables to apply. This is a sample playbook. So the way that it works, this is a simple one that you might see out in the world for NXOS. This configures VLAN 100 on a Cisco switch with the name of web of any device within the group Cisco. So name of the playbook is deploy VLANs. We have our hosts, which says Cisco. So essentially, if we go back here, Cisco is router 1, and it has this IP address and this private IP address. We're not going to gather any facts. In this case, we'll talk about facts. Task, the task. Remember, this is the thing that makes the call to the Ansible module. We name our task. The module is NXOS VLAN, and then we have some arguments or switches that we append to to the module. So we're going to set VLAN 100. We're going to state that it is up, and we're going to name it web. So that's kind of what a playbook looks like, real quick. And now it is time for everyone else to get hands-on. So here's how we're going to do this. There are quite a few folks. I think 67 is what I see. So if you logged into this call and your first name is A through J, then I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Then we're going to use two different links. So if you are A through J, I'm going to put this in the chat here to everyone so you can look in the WebEx chat. Name A through J. Then you're going to use that link. If you're, where's the other one? I have it right here. We have two different workshops set up for this. If you are A through Z, then you're going to log into this link here. Okay. When you do that, you're going to be prompted. It's going to ask you for your name. It's going to ask you, oh, help me out here. David, it asks you for your name and then an email address. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Appreciate that. When you do that, folks, you're going to get Workbench information. So you're going to get access to a VS Code instance. You're going to get SSH access. You're going to get Ansible Tower access. Ansible Tower is the GUI, right? We're not going to do that yet. But you're also at the top going to see Ansible network exercises and the deck that is used to follow along. Now, I mentioned earlier that we were doing this a little bit differently. The slides that I've been using today don't necessarily follow up or, follow this deck, kind of one for one, but in its purest format with the exercises, that deck is going to be, what you would typically see outside of, the sole focused Cisco conversation. Is there anyone who's having trouble getting to their version of the or their Workbench? So essentially what you should have is something that looks like this. Workbench information. Can I get like ones in the chat if you have this, if you're at this stage? Okay, good. A lot of ones. Smart class today. Thanks, folks. All right. So we have ones. Click on the network exercises, and that's going to bring you to this screen. This is the network automation workshop. So the first exercise says exploring the lab environment. So go ahead and click on that. And actually, before you do, if you want, you can scroll down. We can look at the network diagram. So we have an Ansible automation platform set up. We have router 1, we have router 2, 3, and 4. And then as we get into the exercises, you can kind of look and see, what's in there. So click on exercise 1. That'll get you to the diagram. And you're going to go ahead and start the exercises. We'll give, maybe 5 minutes for that. Before you do, this is how we're all going to get started. If you could, outside of hitting the exercises here, you want to click on VS Code. That's where we're going to start this. We're not going to use SSH access because VS Code actually has a terminal in it. So when we click on that, we're going to get something that looks like this. And to make it easier, we can click over here on this 2 pages icon. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to open the folder to get to the network workshop that looks like this. And so then we can, we have all of our chapters. So 1 through 9. Does that make sense? I don't have I was kind of playing around with this earlier, so I can't go back to the way, but it has a terminal. And in that terminal, we can, we can look at some things. So one of the first things that the exercise is going to have us do is, look at, first SSH to the router. Are we able to, when we get router 1. So yes, we can access router 1. What are we managing? This is Cisco IOS XE. It's going to, see, you're going to change directory into the network workshop. You're going to look at the Ansible version. I'm going to spoil all that for everyone here. Look at the Ansible config. So yeah, let me give 5 to 8 minutes for that. Is there anyone that is kind of confused on the directions? Anyone that would like a little bit more for where to get started? Or are we okay? Just looking for anything other than ones in the chat if we're having some issues. So I'll leave you to look through that first exercise. I'll quit talking. I've been kind of yapping for a bit, and I'll come back in about 5-6 minutes. So 2:34 Eastern time. Okay. Please don't hesitate to put something in the chat if you have a question.